Welcome to another episode of the Pedestrian Podcast. As ever, it is myself, Stuart Court, and Adam Nathan.
Hello.
Now, for those who've been with us since when there were three of us on this pod, or since it's been just me and Adam, know that we have had a few names at the top of the guest bucket list wildly. We get to tick off one of those names here. A man who finished his career as a Seahawk, third in the all-time catches, third in yards, and second in touchdowns in franchise history. Undrafted free agent in 2011 to a Seahawks legend, as someone who, for both me and Adam, is an upper echelon of not just sportsmen, but people we have followed through our various sporting interests. It's properly cool, wild, and any other exuberant adjective you can think of to say, welcome to the Pedestrian Podcast, Doug Baldwin.
Hey fellas, thank you for having me, and I'm thrilled that it's called the Pedestrian.
You noticed that
one?
Yeah. Well, before this pod, and back in the day when we first started, your soundbite to shouting at Deion Sanders was a massive part of our intro back in the day.
Okay.
Yeah, we do appreciate it. We know you don't do many of these, so massive added appreciation from that. We'll get to the career and everything else, but since we posted about it last week, there's been a lot of questions asking what you've got to ask him. So to kick off, how are we doing, Doug Baldwin?
We're doing. I think all of us have been kind of just managing the world as it's been the past year and a half now, right? Just dealing with COVID and dealing with all the changes I think our society's going through. I got two daughters now, so I got a different perspective on the world and what's going to happen in the future, what kind of world my daughter's going to be growing up and living in. I'm doing well. I'm my family's healthy. I'm happy. We're blessed in a lot of ways, but there's lots of things to be grateful for, but also just, wondering what the future looks like.
Yeah.
So when we found out that you'd come on, everyone wanted to know the same thing. And that's, what's the deal with the 17-second microwave Pop-Tarts?
Man, I grew up on 17 seconds in the microwave, a Pop-Tart, I don't know, clearly it's not healthy, but the spray on butter,
Uh-huh.
you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
You spray the butter on. It's clearly not butter, but you spray it on and you put it in the microwave for 17 seconds just to get the inside nice and warm and gooey. It's fire.
So I'm sure it's come up a lot over the course of this conversation, but you've got your Family First Foundation, which is all set up in Renton. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
And you said that one reason that you wanted to do that is because when you first got to Seattle in 2011, it's somewhat rooted in a teriyaki spot in the city.
Yeah.
Two questions. Firstly, can we have a location directions for it next time me and Adam are in Seattle and in Renton? And what makes that place, Renton, and that teriyaki spot special?
That was a good question. So yeah, the community center is not currently built just yet. It will be built. We're breaking ground this spring. We were supposed to break ground in 2020. But of course, COVID hit, changed everything. So we're breaking ground hopefully in this spring. It's right next to Cascade Elementary School. It's in kind of like a more, it's kind of like I wouldn't say the heart of Renton, but it's, the heart of the residential area in Renton, in this specific area at least. It's a vibrant community that, to your point, there was a teriyaki spot that was like a half a mile down the block from where the community center is going to be built. And when I went in there one day, 2011 or 2012, there was just kids hanging out there, high school kids. And it's just weird. What kind of situations is it? There's just high school kids just hanging out in this mama teriyaki shop and outside and there's really nothing else around it. It was just this teriyaki spot. And so I asked the kids and I asked the lady who owned the shop, why are these kids hanging out here? And basically the sentiment was they really didn't have anything else to do. That was kind of their hangout spot. I grew up in the back end of the Salvation Army, and that was a community center, and it had kind of all the resources that were pouring into this community center. And it was basically like my second home as a kid, a place where I could go, feel safe, truly be a kid, have some mentors and some people to help guide me just as a young man. And, you know, when I saw that there was kind of like a void for that, thought maybe it might be a good idea to do that there.
Yeah.
So we normally go through this kind of chronologically, but I was listening to the interview you did with Prim Stripperpat a couple of years ago, I think now. And something you said really struck me. You said, people love me, but they don't know me. And as a fan of yours, kind of from what I knew on the field, that it resonates. So if we were to take away 89 and to give people a prism to listen to this interview in as we go through kind of maybe the last decade, who's Doug Baldwin in 2021, and how should people look at that?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm now trying to figure that out myself. You know, I've been playing football since I was 6 years old. It's really all I knew. It was kind of my escape. You know, it was something I kind of really leaned heavily. My identity, it was attached to it, still is attached to it in some ways. And I never really worked on the other aspects of my life. Like, you know, who am I outside of football? What do I enjoy outside of football? I never really worked on those things or even thought about it. And, you know, when you leave the game and all the affirmation that I had received from performing, right, was no longer there. I didn't have the instant gratification or the instant affirmation of who I was because I was performing. Kind of felt like I was lost, kind of felt like I didn't have my footing, you know? And, you know, I was starting the process when I had that interview with Prem. And, you know, really what it came down to is like, look, I'm a human being just like everybody else, you know, like I know that there's some things that, you know, they look glamorous and they feel glamorous, but I promise you, like, there's, you know, I'm still a human. There's still some substance here that, you know, has shit that I got to deal with, you know, to be honest. And it didn't stop. You know, I got married, I had children, and, you know, all of the things that I thought were important while I was playing football, and, you know, they weren't as important anymore. And my priorities changed, and I saw the world from a different angle and a different viewpoint. And then, you know, now I'm at the stage, I'm much further along now than I was, but I was asking myself, like, who am I? You know, what do I, number one, what do I stand for? What are my core values? So if I show up in the world in any capacity, whether it's publicly, privately, like, I know who I am and I can still stand confident on that. I really had to do some deep soul searching for that. And so if you want to know the key takeaways, number one, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, you know, and I'm hesitant. I shouldn't say I'm hesitant to say that. I'm not hesitant to say that, but I also understand that sometimes that can come with some, you know, some baggage for some people when they hear that, right? I don't even want to get into that. I believe that Jesus said, love your neighbor, period. Right. And that's the way that I view how I show up in the world. I want to love my neighbor. I want to exemplify being compassionate, being empathetic, and loving my neighbor. That's number one. That's number one who I am. Number two, I'm a husband. I got a wife, right? Like, that's my queen. She's my world. And we have 2 daughters. So I'm a father. And so now that's my world. That's my package. That's what I'm focused on, right? Like, the tenacity and the mindset that I had when I was preparing for games and trying to, you know, be the best receiver that I could possibly be. I'm just transferring that energy into being the best husband and the best father I could be. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think that's the most important thing that I can be doing at this point in my life, because those are my priorities. And I hope that, you know, flaws and all, people see me as a human being that I am, and not just the football player that entertained them on Sundays, because, you know, which was fun, don't get me wrong, but I'm much more than that. You know?
We had Danny O'Neill, who was Seattle Times, now on 710 ESPN Seattle, and when we brought your name up to him, he said that he hopes and thinks that Doug Baldwin's got a lot of more things to say, and he looks forward to hearing them. So that kind of just echoes what you just said. Because there's people out there who covered you in your previous life, as it were, who can't wait to see and can't wait to hear every word and every syllable you got to say for the next 15, 20, 25 years in that community. So back in 2011, the draft comes, you're going drafted, the lockout is happening, and then Seattle are hellaciously really bold, and you get the letter from John Schneider. It's taken on a life of its own since, really. But what was that whole process like? And when that letter come through to you with obviously your college guy, your running mate, really, Richard Sherman was already up there as a draft pick. That must have been a weird process to go to live through as a young adult.
Yeah, it was. And, you know, part of the strange part of it too was that I had no other experience. This was, you know, this was my time to go into the NFL, potentially go into the NFL. And this was what it was. This was a lockout year. And so I really didn't know anything different. And I was just kind of rolling with the punches as, you know, because everything was so fluid. Things were happening so quickly. Things were changing. You know, that I think at some point they didn't think that the season was going to play, but then 2 days later, I got a call and had to show up for camp, you know? So my mindset was like, I just have to focus on staying ready. So when the opportunity comes, I'm ready to go and make the best of that opportunity. That whole process though. So during the draft, right, that was when kind of the time was open where teams could call players to either tell them that they were, you know, they were going to draft them or they were considering drafting them. I got a call from Kippy Brown and Pete Carroll. And Kippy Brown was the receivers coach at the time. And they basically told me, hey, look, we're not going to draft you. Which, as you can imagine, was kind of a, you know, it was a shot to my pride, right? They said, we're not going to draft you, but we really, really want to bring you in as, you know, as one of our main guys for camp. And so I had to sit with that for a little bit. And then once the draft was over, then Sherm called me. And Sherm was like, hey, they really want you. And of course, you know, Sherm is my brother. So I was like, well, I'm more heavily leaning towards Seattle because Sherm's already there. There were some other options on the table, but ultimately ended up going with Seattle, and partly because John Snyder's letter, right? He hand wrote it and then emailed it to me. But you know, it was a gesture that I don't know. It was just kind of, it was different. You know, it felt different. It felt genuine. It felt real. And that was it was part of the reason, but it was a major part of the reason why I ended up going to Seattle.
Was that something which tied you to Schneider more over your years in Seattle, more than maybe you would have been tied to the GM at the Eagles? So,
yeah, no doubt. Yeah. You know, John and I have a good relationship to this day. You know, there have been a number of occasions where I have disagreed with his decisions, and I have shared those with him. Right. And I think, you know, to his point, or to his credit, you know, he's managed those relationships really well. I think for the most part, you know, and he's, I don't know, it's hard, especially in that business. I think it's really hard to maintain genuine relationships just because there's so much business that goes along into it, you know, and people say it's not personal, but to us, it is personal. But yeah, that letter, that definitely it started a relationship. And I think, you know, I will always have a certain level of respect for him because of the way that he handled things while I was there.
Yeah.
2012 is often seen as like year dot for that team blossoming into what it became. But the germs very much were sowed in 2011 with yourself and Sherm coming in and KJ. At what point does it feel like something's brewing? Because I remember that you've said before, like it was amazing what a group of men can come together and do. And that seems much more existential than just what happens on the field. Do you feel something growing as the time goes on, and you can almost see, well, this is definitely going to end well because I can tell what's happening here?
Yeah, you know, that it's funny you mentioned that. I was actually talking about this with Sherm yesterday, actually. I was actually talking to him about this yesterday. You know, in 2011, like there were so many new guys, there were so many new faces, and you know, not only just us that were coming in, but also guys from the previous year that the previous year was their first year in Seattle. And so we had an opportunity to kind of create this culture, you know. It was brand new, it was really fresh. And you had all these guys who were for a lack of a better term, we were just alpha males, alpha competitors, right? I'll say that we were alpha competitors. And we fought, like we literally fought, on the football field and in the locker room. And like, it wasn't the negative way that, can sometimes be described. Like, when you have a large family, you don't always get along. Sometimes the bigger brother and the little brother, they fight and they argue. But at the end of the day, if you go outside of the family, they have each other's back, and so to your point, in 2011, I think we had started to cultivate this brotherhood that felt built on a true foundation, right? Like you had guys who came from different walks of life, but when we went to the practice field, we practiced so hard, And I'll say this: the guy who led that charge was Marshawn. Think about it this way. How people talk about strain, right? Football terms, they talk about strain. We need you to strain on the football field. But nobody really understands that word strain. Strain is not about like going on the football field and trying to get your job done. Strain is about caring about the guy next to you, right? Like when you care about the person next to you, you care about their well-being, you're going to go the extra mile. When you love the person next to you, you're going to do what you have to do in order to protect that person, do what's good for that person, do what's, and Marshawn was like leading the way in that. The way that he would run, there's no way that I'm not going to get that safety. I have to get this safety on this run play so that he doesn't hit Marshawn. I'll be damned if I let him hit Marshawn. That was the kind of love that we had for Marshawn. And that just, it spread throughout the entire team, and especially on special teams where you had myself, Ricardo Lockett, Jermaine Kearse coming in the next year. You had all these guys who wanted to play special teams. Yeah, we wanted to be on offense. We wanted to do the things that, score touchdowns and all those things, but we were also willing to do the dirty work. And we were willing to do the dirty work not because it was anything about ourselves, it was about the guys that we cared about, like Ricardo Lockett is my brother to this day. I remember specific moments in training and on the football field where, like it was hard, but we would look at each other and say, let's do this shit together, and that's powerful. It's motivating. And when you're on the football field and you see that guy and you need to go do something for that guy to get open or for him to a specific block, you're going to do it because you care about that person. That's what strain is, and in 2011, I think we grabbed a hold of that and we didn't let it go.
One part of that 2011 team, especially that's overlooked somewhat from probably the fan base, is the play and drive to keep playing from Tavares Jackson. He left in 2012, obviously, and came back for that Super Bowl run as a backup for Russ in the Super Bowl. I think he's the last backup to play a snap in the Super Bowl as well. What was his presence like in that young locker room, and particularly him playing through, which I think was a pec injury he had then, and he just kept playing, he kept going out there, kept grinding, and led the team as the quarterback of that young team, and obviously, sadly, since has passed at a tragically young age.
Oh man, it's really T-Jack was a real one, him and Sidney Rice, they every Tuesday during the off season. So we would have Wednesdays off, and Tuesday nights, we called it Tuesday Takeover, and we'd go over to Sidney's house and T-Jack would cook, and T-Jack would cook these big meals. I mean, like home cooked Southern meals. And all the receivers would come over, and it was just like, it was the quarterback and the receivers, and we were just hanging out. We would hang out. We would play Madden. We would play 2K. Sydney lived on the water, so we'd go fishing. We'd go on the jet skis. We'd get in the water, and it was just like those guys, T-Jack and Sydney, aside from obviously him playing through the pec injury, right, and showing his resilience and his leadership on the football field, it was his genuine love for the guys next to him, and he didn't know me, like I'm a brand new rookie coming to the team, but he pulled me into this group and he was like, let's get to know you. We want to get to know you. You're a part of our family now. We see how you play on the football field. We see how much you care about this team. You're part of our family. And, you know, to Sidney Rice's credit, and especially to T-Jack, they cultivated this culture that was on the offensive side of the ball, that was really about, you know, the guys. It was about us. It was about the team. It was about this bond. And I can't say enough about that and about T-Jack, man. And then when he left, you know, he left and then he came back, and he even came back later in his career as kind of like a coach a little bit. You know, he was getting in the coaching world, and he was, you know, he came back as kind of like a consultant, just being a coach on the sideline. And even then, it was just his presence and his mindfulness, the things that he would say, the way that he treated people, his laughs, you know, it was infectious, you know. Now, you know, we got to be honest, like, he's a human being, you know, he had his flaws, but at the end of the day, like, you know, he was trying, you know, and I respected the hell out of that. Because not a lot of people do that, you know. A lot of people, it's easy for it, especially in the entertainment world. It's easy to be fake. It's easy to, you know, pass off the relationships as just like, you know, oh, we're friends, but you're not really friends. T-Jack put in the work. He was genuine about it all, you know, good, bad, and different. And I loved him for it.
At the end of the 2019 season, I remember a lot of Seahawks players and fans saying this feels just like it did in 2012 after the Atlanta loss, in, you know, the field goal in the last minute. And I don't know why, but it struck me, or I almost took offense to it, maybe because 2012 was the first team that I really fell in love with for Seattle. But also it struck me as a little bit disrespectful, of the talent of the team that we had then. And I still don't think that's talked about anywhere near enough. Like, the talent that was on that team was maybe unprecedented. And secondly, the way you talk about the cultivation of an atmosphere, I don't feel like you can just do that. And it almost felt flippant to me to make comparisons to that team, which was so great. I'm not saying that you took a slight from it, but do you ever feel like it's just underappreciated how much went into making that Super Bowl winning team? Because to me, it seems like it's not talked about enough.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a banner hanging in the facility in the practice field, and you just look at the names, and the names on that list, it's incredible, right? I think Mike B and Cliff, they were backups on the team on that team, you know, and that, you think like that's incredible to have guys who were that good as backups on our defensive line. Yeah, you know, number one, I think, to your point, like the talent isn't talked about enough, right? I think culture and leadership, like, you know, it looks differently to people, and it feels differently to people. I know what I felt. I know what I experienced, and we went to 2 Super Bowls off of that, you know? So that's going to resonate with me for the rest of my life. And I think, yeah, you know, part of that is, it's not talked about enough, but number 2, it's really hard to talk about, because it's really hard to build that culture. It's really hard to have the leaders in there who are genuine and who want to hold each other accountable. You know, like Cam Chancellor, Cam was the epitome of the leader in the locker room, you know? And if you weren't doing your job, even if it was me on offense, Cam would watch my offensive practice film, you know? And if I was being lazy, or if I didn't do my job, like, Cam would call it out. He would come to me and he'd be like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" You know? And like, I respected that, because it meant that he cared about me. He was on the defensive side of the ball watching our offensive practice film, telling me that I wasn't doing my job. And not in a negative way, but like, hey, like, Marshawn's counting on you to get this done. Max Unger's counting on you to get this done. You need to go out there and get your job done, because your boys are counting on you to get it done. You know, and that, like, it's not talked about enough. I'll say that.
Over those first few years, you scored your first touchdown in the league against him. Paddy Travers via Will, who's one of our Patreon members, asked that, what was it like going from Jim Harbaugh at college with Pete as your rival coach, and flip reversing that for those first few years in Seattle? And was it extra? One mine was it extra sweet scoring against Harbaugh immediately in regular season play?
Oh man, I think it couldn't have been set up better that our first game, Sherman and I's first game, was against Harbaugh and the 49ers. It couldn't have been set up any better. Yeah, I mean the difference, obviously, and you all know the difference, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a drastic difference between Jim and Pete. They both have they both have different styles of how they coach, but they both have very similar philosophies, right? Like they want to run the ball, control the clock, play stout defense, which I do believe is championship football. Like, you know, I think that's how you win games. I shouldn't say games. You can win regular season games playing differently, but when it comes to championship, you know, football, even we could talk about playoffs in basketball, right? I'm a basketball fan. I love basketball. It's the same thing. You know, it's just a different game. You have to move differently. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I don't even know where I was going with that, to be honest with
you. But one thing over those years is that not a lot comes from press conferences usually. But when you, Mike Bennett, and obviously with his 2 points, was it 2 points is fine, 3 points gets you a fine. It gave insight to many wildly athletic people like myself and Adam. We just really wanted to go on and put on an ill-fitting helmet. Was that something you were aware of when you were on that platform, obviously talking after a hard day at practice, answering the same questions you asked 7 days prior?
It just came part of the territory, you know. You just figured it out, and you know there was really no curriculum. There was no crash course on how to deal with the media, you know. So a lot of us made a lot of mistakes early on, but I think it was good for us because it forced us to kind of grow and mature and be thoughtful about what we were saying and what we were doing. But yeah, I mean, it got monotonous, but at the same time, when, you know, specific pundits would say things negatively about specific players, you know, you couldn't help but hear it and want to respond back. So it played a role in some ways.
2013 Super Bowl 48. We've asked Cliff, Mike, Rob, and KJ the same question, so it's almost a crutch of the pod at this point. What day in the build-up to the Denver Broncos Super Bowl game did you know that the Seahawks were winning the Super Bowl?
Everyone's had the same answer. So from an alibi standpoint, you know, you guys commit a crime together because the answers have been on lock all the way through so far.
Did they say it was the first practice and how fast we were moving?
They said the Tuesday or Wednesday week, the first week, like the first time they watched film, they sat there and went, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, so I wasn't as confident as them, right? Like, I mean, I was confident, don't get me wrong, but you know, those guys, they were in a different mind frame than I was. They saw the game at a level that I didn't see it at just yet. Mm-hmm. And so I was confident, you know, it was the 2 weeks before the 2 weeks before the game. It was a Tuesday. We were off. We had our meetings and we were watching the film. And yeah, you could tell in the film, like, oh, these guys aren't as great as everybody's talking about. we might be able to beat these guys up a little bit, you know. But, you know, it's the Super Bowl and it was Peyton Manning. So you kind of, you know, you humble yourself a little bit. But when we got to New Jersey and we had our first practice, we were flying. We were flying. Like, we were practicing like it was the first week of the season. We were going hard. And I remember it was Walter Thurman and I, we were going head to head in practice in one-on-ones. And we were going so hard. And I just remember Walt and I was walking off the field and I was like, Denver has no idea what's about to happen to them. And, you know, we went out there and we actually did it.
Yeah. KJ said that you could only enjoy the win when all the starters were started to begin taken out. Did you allow yourself to, obviously you scored the final points of the game, I think, in the
so,
start of the fourth quarter to put the 40 burger on the scoreboard. Did you enjoy that? What, 30, 44 minutes before you got your hands on the trophy?
I mean, I'd be lying if I said I didn't. You know, we were all trying to tell each other the clock's not over yet. You know, let's finish it, or the clock's not on zero yet. Finish out the game. But yeah, I mean, it was a celebration really early. You know, and it was our celebration. It was the way that, you know, the all the work that we had put in, all the battles, you know, all the wounds, all the scars leading up to that point. You know, and to be able to semi-celebrate without the game even being done yet, it was pretty special. It was pretty special.
Did that time to celebrate give you time to prep the incredible Google It teardown you put together on Fox?
No, that was already prepped. That was prepped before the game. I was waiting for my opportunity. I told Percy, I said, they better not let me score. They better not let me score. Oh man, yeah, that was prepped way before the game.
It's incredible.
You had Champ Bailey on skates in like the second minute, and I think for me watching, that's when I thought this is going to get nasty. You had a knack of, especially like in cover zero situations, it was like, well, Doug's going to score now because this is just, what are they doing? Can you talk us through a moment, maybe a particular play you can remember, maybe that one from huddle to the end zone where you can see it in your mind? Because I'm fascinated to know what it's like from your perspective, the tape study to lining up, and you can nerd out as much as you want. We love all the details of stuff like this.
Oh man, I do too. I love the art of the sport. Mm-hmm. You know, the strategy, the chess level strategy. You know, to be quite honest with you, my greatest game, which nobody will ever say, and I made a dumb, immature mistake in that game, is the second Super Bowl. I was matched up against Darrelle Revis. Mm-hmm. I murdered him all game long. I think, you know, be candid, I think Russ was a little scared to throw in his direction. You know, at that point, I don't think Russ knew who I was fully, you know, what I was fully capable of doing. But I murdered Darrelle Revis, murdered him. And that was kind of, and that was to me, that was kind of like, this was going into the game. I was like, okay, this is my stage to show just how good I am. I get matched up with one of the greatest defensive backs to ever play the game, so they say. And so I get to show who I am. And I studied Darrelle Revis like I had never studied anybody else. I knew him as a man, right? Like I knew who Darrelle Revis was as a human being. I studied him so much. And I knew his mannerisms, his body language, how, like, when he was confident, when he wasn't confident, which arm he wanted to throw up in what situation, you know, depending on what defense was called, based on what play and formation we were in, where he was going to line up and what he was thinking, where his help was, and why he was going to push me in a certain direction. And I murdered him. I legitimately don't think he covered me on one route. I was open the entire game. And that was, you know, even though I didn't get the ball thrown my way, like that was the confidence I needed to know, you know, not only am I good enough to play against the greats, but I understand the game to the level now where even though I'm not the strongest, biggest, fastest, I can still get open. I can still beat you. And so, you know, I wish I had the film of that game, but you know, I mean, I could go on and on about the details of all of it. You know, I remember a specific.
Serious. It's great.
I remember a specific slant. I was on the right-hand side. I think we were going, if you were looking at the tape, we were going to the right. Mm-hmm. I was on the right-hand side. I was in the slot and I had a slant, but the slant, it was a different timing of the route, right? I had some time to kind of get open. And I remember it just felt like I was playing basketball and it was so fluid. And I set him up and it happened exactly how I saw it on film the previous 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then I just left him. and by that time, Russ had threw the ball on the other side of the field, but I was wide open, and I was just like, yeah, this is it. Yeah, he can't cover me. He ain't got a shot. He ain't got a chance, and that it wasn't just it was all of it, like I miss that part of it. I miss being able to play the chess game at that level and have that instant affirmation, gratification that I won, yeah, I'll stop there. Oh man, you got me going there.
So obviously a massive part of that era as well was the iron sharpens iron, like vibe of everything. If you were going against Richard Sherman, Walter Thurman, Byron Maxwell, Brandon Browner.
Yeah.
That can only be a net positive, can it, over.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those guys brought different skill sets to the table. Sherm was kind of the full package. We already know that he had it all. He could be really aggressive at the line of scrimmage. He knew the X's and O's and the chess match at that level too. So even if you got in position, like he would look at what the concept was for the offense, the down and distance, the time of the game, and he would know what basically on all that information what route you were running. Right. I remember one time I beat Sherm so bad at the line of scrimmage, I got into my route, I turned around, and Sherm was just waiting there for me. Because he knew what we were doing. He knew what was happening. It was just, that I think that was also part of the process of me learning, like, okay, there's more to this than just me being athletic out here, right? But then you talk about Brandon Browner. Brandon Browner was a physical specimen at the line of scrimmage. If he got his hands on you, it was over. You weren't going to move. And so he really forced us to be really good with our hands, right? Walter Thurman, really good in the slot, really smart corner, really athletic. If you didn't have your second and third move figured out and, executed to perfection, Walt was going to be on it. And he wasn't, he was going to be right there. And so he really forced me to hone in on my second and third level of my route and understanding the concept past the initial move off the line. Byron Maxwell was phenomenal playing off, right? When he would play off and he would just read things. And if you gave anything away, he was going to pick it off. All right. So he really forced me to be disciplined in my route running. Like we talk about when you're running and when you're about to go and break down, don't lift up. Because when you lift up, that's telling the defensive back that you're about to stop. Right. And Byron used to always talk to me about that, and so we would discuss different ways that I could do it without telling him stuff, but also use it to my advantage where I would pretend like I was coming up so the defensive back would think I'm breaking, and then I would go and sort of switch it up on the defensive back. So we had a lot of fun in that way. There was a lot of stuff that we were able to do, and those guys, to your point, they contributed so much information and educated me in a number of ways.
Yeah. Something that wasn't fun. I'm just wondering what was your point of view on the process of everything that happened at the end of 49?
Oh man. I think a lot of us were at a loss for words, just like everybody else, and this goes back to what I was saying previously about strain, right? Like we knew who our engine was on offense. We knew who our leader was, our heart, like Marshawn was our guy, the Beastquake 2.0 in Arizona.
My favorite ever play.
If you watch that play again, you'll see Ricardo Lockett running, like sprinting his heart out down the field to go get a block. That's strain. And why does it look like that? Is because Ricardo cares about Marshawn. That he's doing that for his brother, not for any other reason. He's not doing it for the Seahawks. He's not doing it for the X's and O's. He's doing it because he loves Marshawn. That was the strain, the level of strain that we had for each other in that culture on that team. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I firmly believe we should have handed the ball off to Marshawn. I get it. Maybe the pass was the right technical decision. I don't know. In my heart of hearts, and as somebody who, you know, I play the sport off of emotion. I play this. Yes, I play it from a strategy chess level, but the strategy and chess level also involves the emotion, right? Like, do you think if we handed the ball Marshawn that he wasn't going to get into the end zone, right? The offensive line was going to do everything in there. The guys that were up front on the defense, they had no chance, you know, like Marshawn was going to get in there one way or the other. He was going to get in there. And to not have that opportunity was really devastating. You know, I think, and none of us had time to process it. You know, the play was called, and, you know, to be quite honest, like, number one, we weren't handing it off to Marshawn. So I kind of looked sideways at the call when it came in. And then I was thinking to myself, okay, it's a pass play, but the pass play was, we knew that they were going to be in man-to-man on the goal line, but the pass play, selfishly, I was on the zone side.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't going to be in the play. I wasn't going to have an opportunity. So selfishly, I'm like, well, shit, like, you know, if we're going to throw the ball, at least though, I want an option. I want an opportunity, right? But I was zoned. So like, I knew my route wasn't going to be viable. And then I look over and I see the play and I see it get picked off, and I don't have time to process that. You know, my whole thought process is, we're about to win the second Super Bowl in a row. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to do it. We're on the 1 yard line. And then that happens. And, you know, you can't process it in the moment. And then as you start to process it after a while, you start to get angry. You start to question things. You don't, like, what, you know, like, it's just a lot of emotions, a lot of just, and, you know, to be honest, to this day, I still think that if we would have handed the ball off to Marshawn 3 times in a row, and if we would have lost, I think would have been okay. Mm-hmm. You know, I honestly think we would have came back the next year and beat the shit out of whoever we were going to play in the Super Bowl, because they were going to pay for it, right? Mm-hmm. But it didn't happen that way. And, you know, it's really, as guys who put so much into getting to that moment, who had been playing football all of their lives, right? And who had dreamt about not just winning one Super Bowl, but multiple Super Bowls, and kind of having that expectation and feeling like we were capable of doing it. I mean, we were right there on the 1 yard line, right? That was really hard to deal with. That was really hard to process. And, you know, there's still some lingering emotions there, but, you know, at the end of the day, I'm really grateful for that experience. I learned a ton, not only as a football player, but as a man. I had a whole bunch of fun. But yeah, that was definitely a hard experience. I know that was a very in-depth answer, but I wanted to make sure you all, you know, felt what I felt in that moment.
Yeah. So you talk about the lingering stuff, and every time a player has retrospectively spoken about it when they've been retired, Cam Chancellor, KJ on our show a couple of weeks ago, there seems to be quite a lot of catharsis when you actually get to talk about it. And we spent 4 years falling in love with you guys as a community of alpha competitors, as you said, who were saying whatever they wanted, and they were the brashest team. And I've always thought that it felt like you were muzzled for what felt like the benefit of the team, and you'd go to Hawaii and bury it. But I can't help but think that if you guys were allowed to address it at the time, it might have lifted the cloud a bit sooner. Is there anything in that?
You know, I think we were all just trying to figure it out. You know, nobody had the answers. You know, in hindsight, we can look back now and say, yeah, I think we should have done it this way, you know, mm-hmm. or I think we should have talked about it this way. We should, you know, in hindsight, you can go back and do all those things. But in the moment, it was tough. You know, it was really, really hard. And, you know, I lost my grandfather was an incredible influence on my life. God bless his soul. I lost him. It'll be 4 years in September. The closest thing to that Super Bowl moment, you know, it felt really like mourning a death, you know, like it's not the same. Don't get me wrong. You know, it's not the same as mourning a loved one's death. But that was kind of the closest emotion that I like, it was just kind of like disbelief, an unsettling feeling where like you want to do something, but you can't. There's nothing to do. And yeah, I look back on it now and I'm like, yeah, we should have ran the ball. We should have done this. This is how we should have handled it in the locker room afterwards. But, all of those things are in hindsight now. And, as I mentioned, I'm really grateful for the experience because I learned a lot. That whole team, a lot of the guys on that team we're still really close. We still live in Seattle. We reminisce about those times. So it wasn't all bad.
After that, in 2015, you turned that into a career year, 14 touchdowns on the season. You are still there, obviously. Jermaine is still there. Jimmy Graham is added to the fold at tight end. But the young rookie from Kansas State, Tyler Lockett, what made him hit the ground running, really, like you did back in 2011? Obviously, still there now, but he's somewhat overshadowed by DK. Is the appreciation for number 16 from the work he put in, continues to put in, is that somewhat lacking for Tyler? And what was rookie Tyler like to see buzz around?
Yeah, I can't say enough about Tyler. Tyler was, when he came in, he was just this young kid who, he was really funny. He knew who he was, which that I can't state enough, just coming in and having confidence in who he was, which is a credit to his family, his mom and his dad. He was really confident in who he was, and he had a lot of fun just being with the guys, and I'll go back to I'll say this again, T-Jack, Sidney Rice, they created a foundation for us, myself, Jermaine Kearse, to kind of build a culture off of, you guys have heard of it, whoops, you've heard us say that, it's an emotion. It's a real thing for us, it's a culture. It's the way that guys are treated when they're in the locker room. It's a mindset for receivers, because we knew what kind of game plan we were going into. We weren't gonna throw the ball a lot. We were gonna run the ball a lot. So that means we wouldn't have to block a lot. And you needed guys that would come in and kind of adopt that mentality and buy into it. And Tyler did that from the very beginning. He understood the work ethic that we demanded, and can't say enough about Jermaine Kearse and his leadership, but Jermaine really took Tyler under his wing in a lot of ways in terms of understanding the culture that we were trying to cultivate, and Tyler, he absorbed that so quickly and just became one of the guys, and not just, obviously he had the production on the field, right? But it was also his leadership that he was displaying at such an early stage in the locker room. He was incredible in that way. And so, yeah, I don't think Tyler gets enough credit for that. But of course, how could he, right? Not a lot of people know that. They're not in the locker room. They don't understand the little details like that matter. But yeah, there's a lot of guys like that who don't get the credit for, not obviously the work they put on the field, but also the work they do in terms of the culture in the locker room and stuff. And Tyler's one of those guys.
Yeah. Pissing you off just seems like a terrible idea, but I might be kind of floating in that direction a little bit with my next question. So Jermaine Kearse was never fully my cup of tea as a player. But I'm happy to own it. I'm happy to own it. Everyone has their favorites, maybe not their, didn't have anything against the guy, just wasn't my favorite player. However, one of the most clutch guys in franchise history. And that is obviously something, there's hugely to be said for that. So as a teammate, and, I think people pair the two of you guys together quite a lot. What was he like to work and play with? Because he seems like obviously a terrific guy.
He is, man. He's one of my best friends. No, he's my brother. Mm-hmm. He is my brother. He's just a good human being. He's just a good person, and he's genuine. And, when he gets things wrong, he's willing to admit it and willing to have vulnerable and tough conversations. And he demonstrated that in the locker room. He demonstrated the willingness to be vulnerable, to be a vulnerable leader. leadership and culture, especially when it comes to a team, everybody has a role. It's not just about one leader standing up and barking orders, or the one in the back maybe the one in the front who's leading the charge, or the one in the back who's barking orders. Like, you got to have leaders who are amongst people serving, like really figuring out what the needs and desires and the emotional well-being is of the team, of the substance of the team. And that's what Jermaine did. Jermaine was, anybody could talk to Jermaine, and Jermaine could talk to anybody. It didn't matter if you were, from New York or from Louisiana or from Germany. Jermaine just had this gravitas to him, this, magnetizing personality that he brought people together. And that was his role in our locker room, and especially in the receivers room. I was kind of the guy that was like very strict, very disciplinarian. Like, we got to do things a certain way. We're going to bust our ass, do this. And Jermaine made sure that everybody was, nobody was falling through the cracks. Everybody was heard and understood and represented and felt and seen and loved. And we worked really, really well together in trying to build that culture that T-Jack and Sidney Rice built for us, and when you see a guy like actually taking the time to be thoughtful and caring about other people, even when it comes at the expense of his own opportunities, like, it's a humbling thing to watch. And it's, I'm just really grateful for the man that he is, and, couldn't be more happy and more honored to be his brother as well.
And obviously he's done the full circle now. He's back working in a recruiting role at UW as well, isn't he now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One thing on that era, and one of our other patrons, Dan Cohen, wanted to ask you is, you played in that team which had one of the best defensive units ever assembled. How did it, if it did, affect you, your mentality being on the other side, and every conversation nationally is on the defense and not on you, Marshawn, and then obviously later Jermaine and Jimmy and Tyler?
Honestly, I don't think it really bothered us. We would talk shit like it bothered us, right? Like, but it really didn't, because we loved those guys. And I know, most fans say LOB and think of the defense, but LOB meant love our brother. That's what it stood for, and it meant offense, defense, special teams. It was just a subset of group of guys that really bought into the mindset of like, this is our team, this is our family, this is our tribe, right? We're going to build that culture off of that foundation. And, those guys got the credit, rightfully so. That was one of the all-time greatest defenses in NFL history. But we got to go up against them every day, and some days we whooped their ass. And it was really fun to do so. And there was other days and they got back to us. And, to your point earlier, you said iron sharpens iron. Like, we worked really, really hard in practice so that those guys could get a good look, and vice versa. And so, I think we, as an offense and as receivers, we had a lot of success because we were going against some of the best guys in the league every day. And so the guys we saw on Sunday, they were nothing, no disrespect, but they weren't our guys. And I think the same thing for them. They saw the tenacity that we brought in practice every day. And so when they went out to the field, the guys that they were going against, it was cake, but I don't think we ever had a problem with it. Not really. We would say it just because that was kind of like, that was the banter that we had. But we loved those guys. We were incredibly happy for their success. Obviously, their success was our success. So.
Sorry, Stu.
Over I think all your career in Seattle was the same guy calling the plays, Darrell Bevell. This is a pro Darrell Bevell podcast. But on what turned out to be your final exit day in VMAC, you defended him pretty vociferously. What was that relationship like? Obviously, you had to deal with Pete's way of doing things on the offensive side. There was an emerging quarterback who was on the outskirts of MVP conversations pretty often. What was your relationship like, and how was he in dealing with Pete's way, the quarterback, and especially post Super Bowl 49?
Yeah, Bev is just, he's another one of those guys. It's just, he's a good human being, like there's not, if you got something bad to say about Darrell Bevell, I question what kind of person you are, you know, like, and yeah, we can question, you know, play calling, all that stuff. Like I disagree with that. But you know, like, I think the biggest thing that I loved about Darrell Bevell is that he took a group of guys who had strong personalities, right? And he became one of the guys, you know, like he led from a foundation of empathy, you know, like when he would put up plays, like we would go, you know, he would install plays, and, you know, there was plays sometimes I'm like, I don't know what we're doing here. You know, like some guy we would question, we would say, why are we doing this? And he would take the time to explain it. You know, I think at that level, when you have guys who know the sport and know, you know, the X's and O's to that degree, they don't want to know just what, they don't want to be told just what to do. They want to know the why. And Darrell just had a way of being able to explain it. You know, he had a way of being able to explain, like, okay, why are we setting up this play? We're setting up this play so that in the fourth quarter, when this corner is tired and we need a big play, we can go at him because we know we've worn him down to this point, you know? And when you have a guy who is willing to take the time to build genuine relationships with his guys, explain the why behind things, you know, demonstrate his values and who he is as a man, as a human being, is just something special there. Aside from, you know, all the fluff and the politics and the business of the sport, of the business of the NFL, you know, I found it really hard to find people who were that grounded, and Bev was that, you know, and if Bev was wrong, Bev would feel so bad about it, you know, like he would genuinely, if he did something wrong, or if he, you know, there was one time Bev came to me and he was just like, you could just tell, like, his heart was hurting, you know, he was just really, really hurt about, you know, whatever it was. And it was for him to show his emotions, especially in a sport where you're not supposed to show your emotions like that, you know, it was incredible. And, you know, I talk about other guys who built the culture, but Bev was right there in it. Bev helped us build that culture as well.
Talking about showing your emotions, a couple of years later, 2017, a lot of social activism and social justice stuff came to the fore in the NFL. And I was thinking, so I'm Jewish, a practicing Jew, and I've experienced, you know, anti-Semitism my whole life, nothing violent, thank God, but there's always been something. And in 2019, we had an election here that put that to the fore. And I found myself having to publicly defend my community. And I wasn't ready to do it because I hadn't thought that I would ever have to do it. And it got me thinking that in 2017, with that season, the Kaepernick stuff, obviously the recent election, and you really came to the fore as a leader of your community. Did you feel ready for that? Because it was a position of huge responsibility for a young guy to take on, where the country was looking at its stars and saying, like, lead us. And I can't imagine how difficult that must have been.
Quite honestly, I didn't even know. You know, I didn't look at it as I'm taking up this mantle of leadership. It was just, I was just genuinely speaking about how I felt, you know, what I was seeing, and it was how I felt, you know, it was what I believed in, is what I thought. You know, I got questioned the other day about, it was back then when Trump was running for presidency. I called him an idiot, you know, and they were like, do you still think that he's an idiot? Yeah, I still think he's an idiot. I still think that he was divisive. He caused a lot of problems. And, you know, I'm actually kind of glad he caused those problems. Some of them, let me clarify, some of those problems, because he unearthed some of the issues that we hadn't dealt with in a long time. And now it's forcing us to deal with them. I never took it as like stepping up to be a leader in this space. It was just, this was something I was passionate about. I have a platform and some influence to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about it.
One part of that was in 2017 was Michael Bennett's experience in Las Vegas. What was the locker room like? Firstly, seeing that, hearing Michael Bennett's side of the story, what happened to him in Vegas. That must have been a powerful thing to experience from in such close proximity.
Yeah, that was tough, and I don't, I'm not going to speak for Mike, but I think that situation really shifted something in him. Like you can't go through that experience and not, and not be changed, and you could see it in Mike. That was really hard on Mike. He was really emotional about it, and rightfully so. Like not just the situation with the law enforcement, but like being in a situation where you feel completely unsafe. I remember that time very vividly. It was emotional, but to his credit, like he dealt with it. He showed some emotion, but then he showed also the resiliency to like kind of come out of it. So I got to witness that too.
The culture created there, as we've said, you guys were emboldened to speak and be yourselves, and that was just such an amazing thing to see. But with so many guys that were cornerstones of that team, it seemed to end with it's now gone one step too far, according to the people that make the decisions. And as a fan, I'm looking at it thinking, well, you made these guys and you encouraged them to be themselves. And I talked about like a helium balloon kind of getting too high and eventually it just pops and it's nowhere. Is there any thought of like being let down by the people that embolden you to speak so much? Not you personally, but some of your teammates, and then kind of having thrown back in their faces when it got too much, according to them?
To be honest, I never thought of it like that. Times change, and the business of the sport kind of took its toll. Guys had to leave. We had to, make changes. Max Unger was an incredible leader on our offense, on our offensive line at that, and he was gone. And he was a very strong voice of consistency. And, I think it was just a process of changing, and we were, again, hindsight it's easy to go back and look and say we should have done this or should have done that. But I think, us as players, we were still trying to figure it out. Pete as the coach, dealing with these guys that he's never dealt with before, winning a Super Bowl. He's never won a Super Bowl before, right? We were all just trying to figure it out. If anybody tells you that they have the answers, they're lying, right? Because if that's the case, then, well, maybe Tom Brady and LeBron James, since they go to championships every year. But, for the most part, most of us we're just trying to figure it out as we go. So I don't know if I feel that.
Okay.
2018, you were in the squad which made its trip over this side of the Atlantic. You had a pretty good day at Wembley Stadium, I think 90 yards, 4 or 5 catches as well. What was that entire week like? Because for us, it was we've been to Seattle 4, 5, 6 times now, and it was like that in opposite. We were the hosts, and we were trying to do, as Adam said numerous times in this pod, we were trying to do our damnedest to reciprocate the hospitality we've got over in Seattle. What was that whole week like, and what was it like playing in front of, which was a pretty partisan crowd for one of those games over here as well?
Yeah, no, it was incredible. It was an incredible experience. I think when we landed there, we didn't know what to expect, right? Like that was our first time in being in London for a game. But we had a lot of fun. The people were incredibly nice to us, and we felt welcomed and safe, and we felt like it was a really good experience. The practice fields were dope because they were different. Like, I think we were practicing on some soccer fields, and the way that they had the soccer fields lined up, it was just, there's a lot more space than we were used to. So that was cool. But then when we got to the game, and, I think I understand, I guess, American football is different than obviously what we would call soccer, but I could feel the energy, like there was a certain energy, and I've only seen it on TV, when I watch, the Premier League games or something, like I only sensed it when I was watching through TV, but I felt it when we were in that stadium. And that was really incredible. You know, I'll never forget that experience. It was a fun experience. I actually, I messed up my shoulder and my elbow really bad in that game. That's another whole other story, but you know, my enjoyment was cut short because I had to deal with some injuries after that.
You don't speak an awful lot about the team so much anymore, but I've seen you tweeting about, they should have given the ball to Marchand on the first play of the game when he came back for San Francisco. And I think everyone in Seahawk world agreed with you. And you obviously, I'm sure you still care about the team, and you're seeing a transition from what it was when you were there to what it is now, which is much more of a quarterback-led thing. And it's very much Russell's team from the outside looking in. Do you have any thoughts on it? Do you approve of it? Is that kind of how you would hope the team to progress? I mean, your relationship with Russ and things like that?
I mean, to be honest with you, I don't really pay attention to it as much as I used to, right? Like, I'm not in the locker room. I just don't know what the ins and outs of the team are anymore. And there's a lot of new faces, right? So I don't even know what the dynamic of the team makeup looks like. So I can't really comment on it, Obviously I got guys there that I watch, obviously Russ and Bobby and KJ and Shaquille Griffin. I was there a couple of years while he was there, so I wanted to see his progression. I saw he just signed with Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. There's got obviously Tyler, really close with Tyler, David Moore. So there's some, I guess, connection there with the relationships. But as far as like knowing the ins and outs of the team and what should be done, what shouldn't be done, I don't know. I'm on this side just like you all are.
End of 2018, you played in the Pro Bowl. Then 3 or 4 months later, it was not Doug Baldwin, NFL wide receiver, and as your Twitter handle says, it was Douglas Baldwin Jr., husband and father, who used to play in the NFL. We spoke to Cliff about dealing with having to walk away as he did with injury. It sounds like a rough process to go through. Was it the same for you? Because obviously we saw you in the Pro Bowl. There's a really cool video of you mic'd up at the Pro Bowls talking about how much you wish that Tyler was there as well. Then 4 or 5 months later, it's a tweet and a message saying that your NFL career is over. What was that process those few months like?
To be honest with you, I'm still going through that transition phase, and it's incredibly challenging in a number of ways. Like I said earlier, my identity was wrapped up in football. I've been playing football since I was 7 years old, and that's all I've known. And so when it's no longer there, when the structure and the regimen and the schedule and the instant affirmation and the gratification and, all the things that come with that, when it's not there anymore, it's like, who the hell am I? And I didn't know what I liked. I really didn't know who Doug Baldwin was outside of football. And that's a really hard conversation to have with yourself at 30 years old when you're technically retired and you don't really have to do anything. It's like, what am I going to do? For a long time, I was really bitter because I would go out and people would say, go Hawks, or, say something about the Seahawks. And it was really hard for me because I had to leave. It wasn't the fairy tale ending that all of us dream about having going out. And it was really hard to navigate that. But then my daughter was born 3 days after I retired. And so I didn't really have much time to process that either, so I had to become a father and, help my wife out with she becoming a new mother. I'm becoming a father. We had to lean on each other and figure out how we were going to do this together. And so that was a challenging time. I will say this though, I have 3 therapists and they are paid extremely well to help me navigate through this process, So I can reiterate what Cliff said and say that it's a very challenging process, but, luckily we have a lot of guys who still stayed here in Seattle. So we have that support system. And we weren't shy in terms of being able to focus on our mental health. I think a lot of guys shy away from going to seeing therapists and counselors because it's kind of taboo in some ways, but we weren't shy in doing that. So I think that's definitely a benefit of ours.
As we said in the intro, we don't do many of these. We don't really hear much on a public platform from you in this kind of context. Was it something that you were conscious of doing, that you completely stepped, or was it important for you to completely step out of that NFL spotlight for a little bit?
Yeah, it was important for my mental health. Like I really needed time away from the sport. And especially the Seahawks to kind of figure out, like, what am I outside of it? I'm starting to get there where I feel a little bit more comfortable, but at the same time, like, I don't want to talk about the team because I don't know the team. I don't want to talk about what the team should and should not do or have any commentary on it because, it's like, I'm not in the locker room. But I still have an attachment to it, obviously. My identity is still tied to it in some ways. And so there's always going to be that aspect of it. But I definitely need to step away from the game for my mental health.
We mentioned before we started that you've got Coach Doug written as your Zoom handle. And I thought it was going to be like I know you said you hate T-ball. I thought it was going to be like a little league football thing or something. And then you gave a pretty cool story about one of the things that you're working on right now, which relates to you being Coach Doug. So what are you doing now? You've got your foundation and also this.
Yeah. So I think you mentioned it earlier, the Family First Community Center, working on that constantly. We're in expanding that model, not just in Renton, but potential other sites as well. So looking at figuring out what that looks like. We do a whole bunch of different initiatives and projects around the community, trying to be creative and innovative in the way that we serve. And then in some of my off time, I like to figure out fun ways to volunteer in one of the organizations called ventures.org. They provide curriculum to people who wouldn't typically be able to get this curriculum, business information, business course, basics. They provide that curriculum to them. And I got an opportunity to be a coach, right, to kind of help people through that curriculum. So, and I kind of like it, so I haven't changed it yet.
I know it's Patreon. Das, what kind of on that line? What's in the works, and what long-term goals, if you have any, for change do you have? And what is, I think you've just done this there, but what is the largest challenge you faced after stepping away from playing?
Well, let me say this: I don't know what's next. Right? I'm still figuring that out. I'm kind of just gonna let. Whatever opportunity is placed in front of me, if I feel called to go to it, I'll go to it, and then I'll attack it just like I attacked routes on the football field. So I'm not trying to force anything right now. I got 2 daughters and my wife, and we're building a family, and we're constantly thinking about, what does our family look like? What traditions are we going to have when we're older, and thinking about, my behavior now, my personality now, what are my daughters going to say about me when I'm gone? So I'm constantly thinking about those things. So leaving the game, that was the hardest transition, going from, what does my coach think? How am I running this route? And being able to like watch film on what I did wrong, Whereas in the real world, you don't have film on your life and going back to be able to rewind it and see what you did wrong. And so the hardest transition was not, having that structure and that framework, but really trying to figure out how I could use the tools that I gained in football and that I learned in football to apply it to my marriage and being a father and trying to be the best person that I could be. I'm not fully there yet, but, I'm learning a whole bunch about, obviously as a father and husband, but just in life in general. And the one thing that I am proud of is that even if I make mistakes, or if I do good things, or, if I'm challenged here, or there's a weakness here, I'm aware of it, and I really think that was half the battle, just being aware of, what I'm struggling with and when I'm struggling with it, and knowing the triggers. So getting to that point has been really challenging. That's probably been the most challenging part of it.
Looking back on things as a whole, obviously you've obviously done so much reflection on your career since it finished, but whilst you were in it, did you get a chance to enjoy it enough and appreciate what was going on enough? Because I feel as a fan, I didn't enjoy us winning enough. And I kept thinking, what's next, without taking a chance to look at the view from the top of the mountain. Did you get enough of a chance to do that?
I didn't. I feel the same way that you felt. And there was a quote by Derek Jeter when he retired. He said something along the lines of, when you're in it, you can't really enjoy the wins and the success because you're so focused on, like you said, what's next. You're so focused on being successful, doing what it takes to be successful. And so it's really hard to take a breather to say, oh yeah, look, we won the Super Bowl. Look at all the things we accomplished, I look back on it now and like, I can remember things that I didn't realize how cool they were back then. I didn't celebrate them back then, but I can celebrate them now, So yeah, there was definitely that part of it, but I don't think that I missed out because I can, fortunate enough, I'm still close to my teammates. We still have, for the most part, everybody's healthy. And, aside from T-Jack, God bless his soul, like we're all alive still. So, we're able to reminisce about those things. And so, even though we didn't celebrate it in the moment, we can still celebrate it now.
I think we said this to Cliff. We said it to Luck. We've had Lover to Tupu one a few weeks ago as well. What makes Seattle or the Pacific Northwest such an easy place for you guys to? Because obviously you were from Florida originally. Obviously, then you went to Stanford and up in Seattle. What makes that area of the world, that community, so easy for you to settle and set up for future generations of Baldwins?
The community here has such like a certain drive. It's kind of like I feel like people in Seattle feel like Seattle is underrated. It's underappreciated. It doesn't get the attention that it deserves. It doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. And I felt like a lot of us on the team felt the same way when we got here. Sherm was a 5th round draft pick. Cam wasn't drafted where he wanted to be. Even though Earl was a high draft pick, he didn't feel like he was drafted where he should have been. All of us were like these guys who were kind of forgotten about or, weren't highly touted coming in, but we had something to prove, and there was a confidence behind what we believed and who we believed we were on that football field. And I feel like Seattle kind of resembles that in a lot of ways, and if, you're asking me about raising children or raising a family, it's like there's a certain tenacity and, mindset that I want my kids to have. Am I now, I'm saying this now, but, I had that same tenacity and mindset cultivated in me when I was in Pensacola, Florida, and when I got to Stanford, and then when I got to Seattle. And so I feel like I have a unique experience in seeing the different perspectives and feeling the different environment. And I think Seattle region, you talk about, when I say Seattle region, I mean Renton, I mean Seattle, I mean Tukwila, I mean Bellevue. All these places have something special to them that, you could take parts of that and build what this region has become, and so that's special to me, for sure.
It feels silly to put weight behind sporting moments as something that us as fans can remember, but this is more of a statement than anything else. When you scored that game-winning touchdown against Pittsburgh, I think you had 4 touchdowns that night. So Stuart had traveled 100 miles to watch a game in a pub, and I traveled 40 miles to go and watch the game with him. And we watched that with, I think it might have been the last time I ever met our the president, who sadly passed away from a heart attack a couple of months ago. And at 1:30 in the morning, there are 50 guys in the middle of a pub in London celebrating and going mad at something happening 5,000 miles away. And it just seems crazy that sport can do that. But is there any kind of, I don't want to say butterfly effect of what you're doing there, like the ripples of how it affects us, but do you get to appreciate that when you're playing, just how much some of the stuff you guys do means to people that just can't wait for Sundays to see you guys perform?
Yeah, you know, it's kind of difficult to, I guess, to really pin down that emotion and that
Mm-hmm.
feeling, especially when you're in it, right? Because the business side of it takes a toll on you, if I'm being
Mm-hmm.
honest.
Sure.
You know, it's the business side of it is hard, but when you have fans who, and you know, there's different levels of fans. Let's be honest, right? There's fans who, you know, who support you because you're on the team and, you know, you're a good person and you're on the team, right? Then there's those fans that when you drop a pass, they hate you and they let you know about it, you know? So there's, you know, it's a really fine balance. It's hard to pin down that relationship with fans. But, you know, I think one thing that I came to realize looking back and reflecting on my time is that it was an incredible experience to get the support that we did from fans, you know, especially in those moments. I remember times where even when we lost the Super Bowl, we came back and the fans were lined up at the airport, you know, and all of us were down, all of us were sad, but to have kind of, you know, that level of support, even though we lost, you know, like I appreciated that and I'll never forget that, you know? So I don't know if in the moment you could fully recognize, like you said, the ripple effect essentially, but because we were all in it, you know, we were just all part of it, just trying to figure it out. But looking back on it now, I see the impact that it had, you know, not only on the fans and myself, but also the city, you know, this city, but cities everywhere, you know. You guys are in the UK. I'm talking to you right now about, you know, a shared experience that the sport brought to us. That's pretty powerful. That's pretty special.
Mm-hmm. I think we lost Stu he's just dropped out. He lives in the middle of England, and I don't think the internet travels quite as well as it does when I'm in London, but still recording. So a couple of silly ones. I think